Natural phenomena in the physical world is something that's both invented and discovered. The invention component happens first. Like in the case of the solar system, the heliocentric solar system, someone had to sit down and use their imagination to conjure up a way that these physical entities, planets, would interact with each other, and in a way that would align with the observable evidence at the time. So the system, the heliocentric solar system, is something that's conjured up in someone's imagination first. And as long as the empirical observations year after year still line up with that model and not contradict it, then the model stays valid, and we eventually accept that as a discovery, as a reality of what's actually out there, objective reality of what's actually out there in the physical universe. So in the same way that these sorts of physical phenomena are invented using models from someone's imagination, we can do the same thing with social phenomena. And that's what I have done with this video essay on the modern social pyramid, social hierarchy pyramid. And before you roll your eyes and blow it off right away, decide that you hate it, give it a chance. Look at the model I've created and apply what you're observing every day to this model and see if it holds. And if it doesn't, well, then it has to be thrown out and adjusted. But so far, I think that I've done a good job of capturing all the events that have been happening and making sense of them with this model. So without further ado, here's the modern social hierarchy pyramid. If you have been watching this series from the beginning, you should be very familiar with this geometrical object by now. This one in particular represents the well-documented conical distribution of wealth and power so typical of almost every major civilization that has come into existence since the beginning of the Bronze Age. It features two main groups, those who produce the wealth and those who take the wealth through force. We can simply refer to this coercive transfer of goods and services from the producers to the takers as theft. If you're having a hard time understanding that concept, then before we proceed, I advise you to look back in my series to the video essay on ancient Egypt, where, along with the help of this ancient artifact, I discuss the origins of the territorial state in graphic detail. This older, outdated social hierarchy pyramid has been upgraded quite a few times over the centuries throughout various parts of the world and continues to grow in complexity, but its basic framework has held firm through the ages. The forced transfer of wealth from those who produce to those who take. The latest incarnation was handed down to us by the framers of the Constitution of the United States of America. It features a democracy combined with a constitutional republic. It's very sophisticated and not intended to be intelligible to anyone who might have only a passing interest in how it works. But fortunately for you, I'm going to break it down right now in this video. The upper part of the pyramid is occupied by the takers, who extort wealth from the lower and larger area of the pyramid comprised of the producers. Yes, the democratic masses of the producing portion of the pyramid are filled with all different kinds of people, doing different kinds of things, some happy, some sad, some angry, and some just not feeling much at all. However, their productivity, or the amount of value they provide to the general population, varies with where they are in the pyramid. The producers near the top make the most money, providing the most value for the economy, where the producers at the bottom are the least skilled and, on an individual level, provide the least amount of value for the economy. A portion of all the wealth of the producing class gets transferred to the upper part of the pyramid through taxation, which is, again, a fancy word for theft. At this point, if you are confused about how taxation in a modern democratic state is theft, then please watch the previous video in the series about the origins of the Constitution of the United States. Now, the name of the game, from the taker's standpoint, is to maintain tension between the upper and lower portions of the producing class. That way they can use various fabricated conflicts as red herrings to throw people off. This device never fails to confuse the average person and obscure from the population the real source of their problems. Let's dive into the details of each section of the pyramid and see how they operate. We'll start with the producing block. You know these people, they're the people that do everything in the world. They take the raw materials of the planet and turn them into useful things. They become experts in many various disciplines and convert that knowledge into services that are needed by everyone for a happy and healthy life. You got your farmers, your engineers, your builders, your doctors, scientists, artists, and everything else that people do to make the world go round. Oddly enough, when not under the influence of the manipulation of the media, mostly everyone in the producing class is content with what they're doing. Everyone has aspirations and dreams, but you reap what you sow, right? And there really is no such thing as someone being upset just because someone else makes more money than them. For proof, just ask yourself if you're bitter about someone being more intelligent than you or more skilled than you. I'm not. I actually find those people quite useful. They make cool things for me like iPads and Facebook. And for the most part, all producers share the basic virtues that are necessary in order to be self-sufficient and successful in producing value for other people. After all, these were the very virtues that enabled us to break out of the dogmatic and oppressive ways of the Middle Ages, endure harsh voyages at sea, and build a civilization on the wild frontier. Now, these virtues were manifest in the people of the producing class, and except for a few outliers speckled across all levels of wealth and represented in gray on the diagram, most people were able to deal with each other in an obliging and civil manner. Then comes the social and political commentary of the mass media, the great editorial multi-tentacled monster of reality. Originally, the editorializing was done by the priestly class. Their function throughout most of history was to inform the general public of their place in the world and help them understand why their lives were so miserable. In modern, secular times, this job is carried out by the mass media. In both instances, past and present, this editorializing serves to uphold the status quo by dividing the population and turning them against each other. The media gave us the concept of class. Now everyone can know where they stand in the pecking order of quality of life, even though this is entirely subjective. Thanks, Mr. News Guy. The editorializing goes on with reasons for why people make the amount of money that they do, which can be pretty much summed up with the words racism, sexism, greed, and selfishness. The general population, being the gullible dolts that they are, completely eat this stuff up. Now they don't have to blame themselves for their problems. Everyone starts to get angry, including some of those that have money. The inevitable result of a population of people finding a scapegoat for their personal shortcomings is the disintegration of the value system that enables people to excel by their own merit. The last thing to go is independence. Now they are dependent on the force of the state to secure their livelihoods. Mission accomplished. And an entire culture develops around this attitude, thus ensuring that failure is an inevitable self-fulfilling prophecy, spiraling down and down, locking a group of people into a permanent underclass dependent on the state to stay alive. This is a pretty angering situation to be in, and where do you think that anger gets directed? That's right, at this guy, the high-skilled producer who makes a lot of money. In their eyes, he's a racist, sexist, selfish bigot who only achieved his status because of his social privileges, not because he has any of these virtues. And now he, or she, gets angry in retaliation to these accusations, calling those of the lower socioeconomic ranks lazy and entitled. It becomes an endlessly perpetuating cycle of class conflict. The media sticks their microphones in and the politicians open their ears waiting for their opportunity. Each party gets behind the candidate who promises to deal with their antagonizers on their behalf. This would of course involve legislation and the use of state force. Generally, one group wants to use the state to steal money and liberties from the other group. In political speak, this is called wealth redistribution and leveling the playing field. A third party is watching behind the scenes with interest, because after all is said and done, there will be lots of money to be divided up, and it won't include you. That is exactly how wealth is extracted from the producing class in this modern pyramid. The most sinister aspect of this design is that the producers, without realizing it, end up doing it to themselves. None of this wealth extraction would be possible without the next class of people. These are the enforcers. They are cops, marines, and everything in between. What they actually are, though, are mercenaries, comprised of three types of individuals. A mercenary is a hired soldier who fights for causes other than his own. The first type of individual comes from the lower part of the pyramid and enlists in these kinds of services mainly to improve his or her economic condition. There is no moral purpose for them, no deep conviction in the cause other than just being a means to an end. That end is money and perhaps maybe skill attainment as well. Since this is unrelated to the agenda of those who initiate armed conflict, the label of mercenary is warranted. This guy probably shares an equal representation in terms of numbers as the former individual. Typically coming from the middle class, he is what I call a true believer. The media has him sold on the virtuous reasons for any particular military engagement, and he wants to be courageous and do the right thing. His intentions are pure and good, but unfortunately he has fallen victim to the deception of the mass media. And all that media indoctrination cloaks the harsh reality that awaits him when he experiences the horror of armed conflict himself. But a soldier's got to follow orders, and it is at this point that he not only becomes alienated from the reasons he's fighting, but may become depressed, neurotic, and detached from his actions. He is now just going through the motions to get paid. He is now a mercenary. And now you're going to learn about this third type of person. He looks that way because he really doesn't have a conscience. These people are all over the place. They see people as objects to be manipulated. As a soldier or police officer, he may even enjoy the power he has over others. He may even enjoy killing. That's his cause, pleasure. Because he gets paid for it, he is a mercenary, and one of the most useful kinds. These are the people who make up the modern enforcer class. The media. This is your television networks, news programs, newspapers and periodicals, talk radio, political commentary shows, sitcoms, movies. But this is only half of it though. Secondary and higher education also operate as mediums through which propaganda is infused into the population. Many times the latter source is the most poignant. But how are the people who run these institutions takers? Let's break it down. Politicians extract money from the general population using the force of the state. If the media receives any of this money from either side in return for spewing propaganda at the masses, then they are takers as well. Media propaganda generates more class conflict, leading to more legislation, leading to more money for politicians, and more money for themselves. Around and around we go. For more on how the media manipulates reality, you can look up Jean Baudrillard's work, Simulacra and Simulation, and kind of go into depth on this process yourself. However, this very video, my video, is media as well. But as long as payment comes directly from the consumers who give their money voluntarily, then that is just a free market transaction. No taking involved. Up near the top are the politicians. They are simply opportunists, like anybody else. Only like those expressionless faces colored in gray, they don't seem to have much of a conscience either. They don't seem to exhibit any consistent principles and have no problem lying right to your face. To understand the mindset of these types of people, we need to go back to the world's first experiment in democracy, ancient Athens. During this time, you had people like Socrates who called themselves philosophers and walked around engaging Athenian citizens on various topics of philosophical inquiry. This, of course, is always depicted as being done under the shade of a tree somewhere and was an activity undertaken only for pleasure and the joy of wisdom. There was no money exchanged. This guy, Protagoras, represents the other end of the spectrum. He was what the ancient Greek philosophers referred to as a sophist, someone who specializes in rhetoric and the art of persuasion. In the democracy of ancient Athens, being able to persuade the citizenry of your position was considered a valuable skill for obvious reasons. A person like Protagoras would be hired to teach young up-and-comers the art of persuasion and would charge for his services. Today, if you are accused of sophistry, that means your accusers think you are a lying bastard selling out for money. One of Plato's famous dialogues has Socrates, the always clever questioner, expose the falsity of sophistry to a student by engaging Protagoras in a debate. I'm sure Socrates would have a field day today if he were still alive. Let's examine this group in context. They gain wealth through forcible transfers from the producing class as well as political donations from lobbyists. Both sides compete for control over the use of force, which can be granted to them through favorable legislation created by the politicians. The man at the top represents not only the nations, but the world's wealthiest individuals. He is big business. That's your oil and gas companies, pharmaceutical companies, technology, retail, fast food, television networks, and of course, the big banks. These are the people that pulled the strings on the American Revolution. They were who the founding fathers were in debt to, and today, politicians are still in debt to them. They can't get elected without their financial contributions. Except, instead of money, politicians owe big business favorable legislation. Legislation that will keep them at the top of the pyramid by making it virtually impossible for other producers to compete with them. It is important to remember that these are personal debts. If someone scratches your back, then you better scratch theirs. The results of not doing so can be devastating to a politician's career and reputation. At best, this presents a severe conflict of interest. At worst, it's straight-up collusion. And the kicker is that it is not only perfectly legal to engage in this kind of racket, but because of fiduciary responsibility to the shareholders of a company, it is legally mandatory for big business, which means they can get sued by shareholders if they don't do everything they can to manipulate politicians. Holy crap! So there you have it. The gift from our forefathers. An upgraded, super complex version of the basic extortion racket that has been around forever. If you hold the principle that theft is immoral, then the territorial state violates your principle, because it is based on theft. Therefore, you can't in good conscience teach that theft is wrong and support the state. If you hold that some people are good and some people are bad and we need the necessary evil of the state to keep the bad people in check, then what will inevitably happen, as history has demonstrated over and over again, is that the bad people migrate to where the power is, get hold of the monopoly on force, saturate the upper ranks of the pyramid, and use their newly acquired power to do bad things. So you still can't have a state. Now, you're probably asking me what the alternative is. I've already covered this in previous videos, but I will mention it again to close out the video. The alternative is a stateless society. But this is sort of begging the question, so let me extrapolate by referring to the blueprint provided for us by the Indus Valley Civilization, which existed without a state for 2,000 years. Yes, that's right. No state existed for 2,000 years. Their society was defined by what historians refer to as a heterarchy, made up of only producers. Social cohesion was achieved through a unified ideology. In the future, I predict that this unifying ideology will be derived not from mystical beliefs, as was the case for the peoples of the Indus Valley, but from universal ethical principles that apply to everyone at all times. The free market will ensure the most efficient use of resources and will prove to be humanity's greatest source of energy, where the drive to better oneself will inspire achievement that could never have been imagined or attempted under a coercive state. But what if one of those happy industrialists goes rogue? What if this person or persons becomes greedy and callous and seeks to take over the world by amassing large army and lots of property? What if he gains a monopoly on land and force and declares himself supreme ruler of the land and starts extorting wealth from everyone else? He could even fund a gigantic publicity campaign like Kim Jong-il and convince everyone how wonderful he is, while at the same time throwing people in prison and blowing up other countries. You see where this is going? Yep, this already happened. These guys did it in 1776, remember? However, the general population gave them the power voluntarily. They did it in exchange for wealth. It was the Faustian bargain that no one realized they were making. Isn't it ironic? The very people who claim to have these principles are the ones that enslaved not only black Americans in the 19th century, but all Americans and future generations, including their own grandchildren and great-grandchildren and great-great-grandchildren, to the most powerful and expansive territorial state that the world has ever known. Why? I'll tell you why. It's because they did not have universal principles. Principles that apply at all times to everyone under the sun, including themselves. You see, they exempted themselves from the rules and set up a system around that royal screw-up. Let's take a look at some of their statements in light of what I just said. Now think of the first lines of the Declaration of Independence. Now consider each quotation and how it completely contradicts any lofty principles set forth in the Declaration. John Quincy Adams. The men of property and consideration think the Massachusetts Constitution gives too much liberty to the unprincipled citizen, to the prejudice of the honest and industrious. George Washington. Mankind left to themselves are unfit for their own government. Universal principles they did not have, and this is the result. Could you imagine not having universal principles in physics or Euclidean geometry, or any science for that matter? What kind of botch job would civilization amount to under that circumstance? Well, in the world of all things social, this is what happens when you don't have universal ethical principles. Universal principles. Let's start there. Teach your children how to think. Teach them how to think critically, how to apply logic and reason deductively from first principles. Don't deny to them their inheritance, the wisdom passed down through the ages from people who century after bloody century died in the name of truth. This is the best gift you can give your children. They are human beings who will be responsible for carrying the torch of humanity into the future. They will represent the accumulated knowledge and wisdom of all mankind and use it to forge a better civilization, making sure that all of our struggles were not for nothing, were not in vain.